Okay, we are officially ready to start. So let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Shri Yukteswar, beloved Guru, Paramhansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, we humbly bow to you all. Bless us with thy energy, with thy love, with thy joy, and help us to bring that into all that we do, all the service, and all the light that we try to bring. We are thine. Be thou ours. Om. Peace. Amen. So we have a wonderful topic this morning. We're going to talk about joyful service. And partly the reason that this came up is that I'm involved now in writing a book on service. And I'm going to describe just briefly that process, and I'm going to, because about half of you in the room are teachers, and many of you, whether you teach or not, have been involved with these teachings for a long time. I'm going to simply read the chapter headings for the book to you, and you'll know what the book is going to say, even though I haven't written it yet. So, because it'll be based on Master's teachings, of course. The book came about in this way, that the idea for the book. The book has not come about yet, so I have to edit that. The idea for the book, Devi and I had gone with Diana and a couple of other people to our beautiful service work in Brindaban. For those of you who don't know about it, Brindaban is a city near Delhi, and it's also the boyhood home of Krishna. That's where he grew up. So all of the stories about Krishna as a cowherd and all of that, most of that took place in Brindaban. So we had been there because Ananda has a work, it's a separate charitable trust, the Paramhansa Yogananda Public Charitable Trust, serves about 5,000 or 6,000 widows there. In India, many women, after their husband dies, are either abandoned or they're put out of the home. That practice is slowly stopping now, but nonetheless it's still there. And many of them make their way to Brindaban with the thought that my family has rejected me, but Krishna will never reject me. He will take care of me. Well, he takes care of them, but at a very low level of poverty, and many of them are beggars. So Ananda, this charitable trust, has started a work there. We provide free food, free medical care, home visits, and most importantly, love and dignity to about 5,000 or 6,000 widows. And so every day, maybe 1,500 come and they get vegetables and milk and fruit and so on. About 5,000 or so every month get rice and dal, beans and so on. We make sure that their homes are set up, and we have a staff of about 80 or 90 people there who make home visits, and many of the older ladies, there's a charity hospital run by the Ramakrishna order, but many of them can't even get there, or they're intimidated by the process. So the main thing is that we're giving love and support and dignity. We're trying to act as the hands and the heart of Yogananda. And there are miracle stories about that, but if we go into that subject, we won't get to the other subject. So, come back to the sequence of events. Devi and I had visited, along with Diana and a woman, Pia, and the next day we were at a lunch with the man who's running that program, Manjunath, and we were talking about all of the training that the staff had been getting. And so they, members of Ananda, had been coming over for many months on a weekly basis to give them training in how to meditate and energization and lots of practical training for how to look for certain kinds of illnesses or conditions, all of that. But many of them, about a third of the staff, had become disciples of this path and were moving toward Kriya. But here it struck me that there's a kind of a universal problem here. Here are these people, they might meditate for a half hour a day, then they go out and they serve for 10 hours a day. We have a whole path that outlines meditation. We have meditation classes and support groups and Kriya prep and Kriya support. We don't, as a work, have the same kind of thing for service. And yet, Master said that our path is a combination of meditation and service. And so it struck me that it's time that we have a book on service. And not just a book, we have a whole aspect of our work, because most of us, you know, here we're talking about the staff of the charitable trust, but how many of us serve more hours a day than we meditate? I won't ask for a show of hands, but obviously, you know, the major part of our activity is what we do in the regular day-to-day life, whether we're serving kind of professionally or many of us have jobs. Nonetheless, service is not what we do. Service is the mindset and the attitude with which we do our work. And so Master said a couple of things. One, he said service is as important as meditation. He also said, and I quote, "You will never get there without serving dynamically." So, we have to serve, and we have to do that as a part of our spiritual path. So I'm going to, with that little introduction, I'm going to read the chapters that will be in the book. And I've written the introduction in the first part of the first 3 chapters. But just I'll read them and make a very, very brief comment on a couple of them. And then I'm going to go in much more depth into the subject. But chapter 1 is that Seva can dissolve the ego. Now for us personally, Swami put it so succinctly. He said the entire spiritual path can be summed up by dissolving the ego. That's the whole purpose of the spiritual path. And that is done, he said, by longer, deeper meditation and by seeing God as the doer in everything that you do. So the whole of the spiritual path is meant to dissolve the ego. That's done by longer, deeper meditation and seeing God as the doer in everything that you do. So that, we could work on that alone. That could be a whole month-long seminar, just that succinct teaching of what it's all about. But coming back to this first chapter, service can, in fact, dissolve the ego. And that's the purpose of it for us as devotees. On the other hand, the purpose for the world is that God wants to bring light into the world, and he needs to have channels in which he can do that. We had a very interesting discussion last fall with a dear friend. Some of you know of him. His name is Indu Ban. And many of you who've read the Path, the New Path, in the chapter where Swami talks about the Delhi project and getting that land and how this friend of his introduced him to Nehru, and he actually got permission from Nehru. Well, that was Rani Ban, the mother of Indu Ban. So Indu Ban was an old-time friend. He was Swami's right-hand man back in 1959, 60 at that time. He's still alive and a charming man. He was a Supreme Court justice. At any rate, he's still psychically in touch with his mother, Rani Ban, and she was a great, great spiritual light. Almost all the modern saints that you've heard of in northern India, all of them came and stayed at her house. Anandamoy Ma, Sri Yukteswar, Nimkaroli Baba, on and on and on. Anyway, many, many of them did. So she's a very high soul. Anyway, the story that Indu told us, he said that he often dreams of her. He sometimes sees her in, semi-vision form, often hears her voice. She said that she is often in touch with Babaji on the astral plane. And kind of on behalf of all of us, I think, she asked Babaji, why do you allow so much darkness to go on in the world? And the answer he gave was very interesting. He said, there's always going to be a balance between light and dark in the world. He said, I cannot suppress the darkness. My job is to increase the light. And so Babaji's job, and if we're going to be in tune with Babaji and Master, our job is not to worry about trying to suppress darkness. Our job is to increase the light. Increase the light within ourselves and increase the light in the world around us. And that brings us back to the topic of service. Because as we serve, the primary service that we have is not what we do. That's important, but it's 5% of the picture. The other 95% of the picture, both for us individually and for the service itself, is not what we do, but how we do it and the attitudes with which we do it. To walk down the street joyfully is a greater service than to be at a soup kitchen handing out food and be grumpy. Swami Kriyananda had a bubble of joy that was around him all the time, a light that surrounded him, and his mere presence on a street would change the street. One time we were in Los Angeles, we were walking down on a street, a group of us. We walked down one side and then back the other. And then there was a little store. Swami stopped in the little store and said, "Oh, what a beautiful store you had." The woman came out. She said, "Oh, I was so hoping that you would come in." And he said, "Well, why?" She said, "I was watching you walk down the street and there was an aura of light around you, and everything that you touched had that aura of light around it." Now, walking down the street in that kind of consciousness is a higher form of service than most of what we think of as service. So, service can dissolve the ego because it expands our consciousness. The ego is not a thing. The ego is a state of consciousness. All we are is the soul. We're not the ego. We're not this body. We're not this personality. This body and personality are just the temporary vehicles for our soul in this incarnation. But we have incarnated in thousands and thousands of other bodies and personalities and circumstances, and it's always the soul that incarnates. And in each of those incarnations, we take on, the soul takes on, as Swami Kriyananda so charmingly called it, a bundle of self-definitions. So in this life, I'm in a male body. So I don't think, oh, in this life I'm in a male body. I think I'm a man. Boy, am I ever a man. I'm a manly man. And so we take on those bundle of self-definitions that are not us, but we intensely identify with that. I won't go into much of it, but I've been playing with the dynamics of this life being like a video game or virtual reality video game. In a video game, you take on a game character. They call it an avatar. Swami did not like that use of avatar, by the way. Nonetheless, that game character has a bundle of self-definitions. And you as the player call it the soul, and that's the incarnation. You get immersed in whatever that drama is in that video game. Whether you're trying to jump up and down on top of things, or you're fighting, or you're flying, or you're driving, you get completely immersed in that. But within that video game, there are certain laws of that video game. And within the character that you create, it's got certain characteristics. Now, it would be very schizophrenic to think that you were that video game character, wouldn't it? It's just as schizophrenic to think that you are this video game character, this bundle of self-definitions. So how do we get out of that hypnosis? How do we get out of that delusion? The delusion is the ego. So we have to dissolve the ego. That's the Master said, it's the soul identified with the body and personality. It's the player identified with being the avatar, the game character. And so we have to get out of that. And the way out of that is to expand away from those thoughts and ideas and feelings and compulsions and obsessions that make us think that we're only that character. And service is extremely important in that, because it has to do with rising or descending energies. Master said that think of the heart as kind of a pivotal point. The heart is where the feeling nature is. And we're taught in yoga that if we can dissolve the primordial feeling nature, the chittva, if we can dissolve the whirlpools or the little programs of that chittva, the way that it has formed within us, if we can dissolve those, we go into a state of union. So the heart is pivotal, and the energy, the feeling energy, will either rise or it will fall. And as that energy falls, we get more and more contracted, and we get more and more concerned about what happens to me. I don't care what happens to other people. I don't care about those others. I don't care if I have to lie and cheat, and we start contracting into the protection of this game character. And when we do that, the ego grows in power. So we have to expand our sympathies. We have to begin to care about other people and to serve other people and to serve good causes. All of that causes the energy to rise, and as the energy rises and as it stays in the higher chakras, then that miasma of the ego begins to loosen and to dissolve. If we could keep our energy in the high chakras all the time, if you could keep your energy at the point between the eyebrows, your life force, your prana, if you could keep it there all of the time, you would very, very quickly not think you were the ego anymore. Master said, in fact, that the fastest way to progress spiritually is to keep your energy at the spiritual eye all the time. Swami had a fellow monk who thought, well, that's a good experiment. And he did that, and within 2 or 3 days, he began to not even be able to feel his body. His hands, his whole body kind of took on an otherness to it. And finally had to pray to Master to take that experience away, because he worked in the print shop. And he was afraid that he would harm himself. But see, the principle here is what's important, is that by having the rising and expanding energy and having it in the higher chakras, and especially at the spiritual eye, the ego automatically dissolves, because the ego's not a real thing. It's a state of consciousness. It's that hypnotism that I'm the game character. And if you get the expanded consciousness, you kind of look and, oh, I'm not the game character. Of course I'm not the game character. And so service allows that to happen. So let me go on with the other chapters. I'm going to run out of time here. Okay, as I say, because so many of you are steeped in these teachings, you'll understand the essence of these chapters just by the chapter heading. Chapter number 2 is God serving God. Master, remember the story of him. In later life, he took on a lot of karma physically, and at one point he couldn't walk very easily. His knees, he said, it looked like little corkscrew entities drilling into his knees. He was taking on astral karma for people. And so some monks were carrying him down some stairs, and he said, oh, thank you so much for your kindness. I said, no, Master, thank you for everything you've given. And he just smiled and he said, God serving God, that's his drama. Well, that is his drama. There is nothing else. See, our souls are extensions, are sparks of God. And if it's only the soul pretending to be the game character, and it's God who has become all of those souls, what else is there? There is nothing else. But how many times or how often do we actually think of that concept? So when we serve, we should think that the people that we're serving are God, or the thing that we're doing is God. There's been an enormous amount of service around this weekend and the event tomorrow. And as the consciousness thinks that I'm doing this for God, I'm serving God in this, but it's also that God is serving through me, so it's God serving God. The more we can hold that consciousness, the more this fog of the ego melts like a little mist in the sunshine. It just dissolves. We don't have to worry about it. Just keep the consciousness high. That light dissolves the mist. The third, then I started to write a chapter on how important attitude was, but I realized that attitude, Swami used to say to us that attitude was the essence of everything. Proper attitude. And so instead of writing, I couldn't write one chapter. How many different attitudes are there? An attitude is kind of a leaning or a kind of predisposition towards something. How many of those do we have? 100, 200? You know, we have lots and lots of those attitudes. And so which ones are important in service? Even that were too many. So I broke it up into 3. Attitudes of energy, those things that, and I'll go into that a little bit more, those things that give us energy or take away the blockages to the flow of energy. attitudes of the heart, so opening the heart, things like compassion, caring, kindness, friendship, divine friendship. Swami always signed his letters in divine friendship. That little bubble of joy, outwardly, the outer edge of that bubble, as it bumped up against people, was expressed as divine friendship. It was a beautiful aspect of him. And then the third grouping of attitudes, which I'll also talk about, is using the power of the soul. And those are the 8 aspects of God that by which he manifests. It's like the spectrum of the colors in white light, the red, orange, yellow, green, and so on. The aspects of God are what make up the different tonations in the light that is within us. So I'll come back to that. Okay, then I'm going to just read these. Meditation is the foundation of service. So that's a chapter on meditation. Creating magnetism in your service and the power to change lives with that magnetism. How to serve effectively, methods and techniques of serving effectively, working with higher powers, the science behind service, and finally forming a lifelong practice of service. So those are the chapters of the book, and then we'll go on from there. But let me come back now to, it's what's been happening this week. So I'll talk a little bit more about the attitudes of service that help us produce energy. Now, energy, we don't actually produce energy, is not the right word. It's channel energy. Energy is all around us. Master used to take a pinch of his flesh and say there's enough energy in this little pinch of flesh to keep the city of Chicago going for a week. And so there's enormous energy around us. And of course, through the energization and many of our other techniques, pranayama, we draw that energy from the universal source, and it fills our body, or in this case, it empowers our service. So energy is drawn by willingness. Master said, will, he defined will as energy plus desire directed toward a goal. And so in the energization exercises, it's energy. The desire is to, let's say, fill the cells, all of the muscular cells and all of the everything in our body with God's cosmic energy. And so that desire, we could have that desire, but energy wouldn't flow unless we also open ourselves to that flow and direct it with consciousness. So it's willingness, so desire plus the flow of energy directed toward a goal. So that's the first step. That can be enthusiasm, as you've been working on this project for the Yogananda Fest tomorrow. Unless there was willingness, and willingness on a large number of people, you can't do a big work like that without a huge flow of willingness. But here's the good part. You get so much more out of allowing that willingness to flow through you than what it takes to do it. So I hate to blow the cover, but the success for tomorrow is already here. The real power of the Yogananda Fest has already happened, and it's through the service and the bonding and the upliftment of consciousness of all of you who are involved in putting on the event. And then tomorrow we're just going to go and eat the dessert. But I know that all of you know it. All of you who've been working on that know how much it's helped you as an individual. So when we have that willingness, that energy flows through, and Master said the channel is blessed by that which flows through. Willingness alone won't get the job done. Willingness then has to be focused. So imagine, I know that Lakshmi was organizing a lot of these things. Imagine that she had a little crew that was going to be, they're designated to set up the altar tomorrow. And that was their job. But that crew didn't know how to focus. So they'd go, we have to go buy flowers, but whoa, wait, there's a shoe store there. I need some. The flowers would never. So willingness has to have focus, but that even focused willingness is not enough to get very much done. There has to be intensity behind it. So you can have a little laser, one of those laser pointers that you use, and it'll send a beam up there and you can see it, but you shine it at the moon and it doesn't get to the moon. But a powerful laser could be seen, the dot on the moon, by a telescope. And so you have to have willingness, that's the flow of energy, plus focused energy, plus intensity. And then to get something big done, you have to have duration. You have to have stick-to-itiveness. And you have to stay with something long enough until that job is done. These are all teachings on willingness and all attitudes that we have to develop. We have to develop the attitude of focusing our minds. And lots of our practices help us do that. We have to develop the attitude of putting real intense energy into whatever we're doing. It was wonderful to watch Swami work because he was so focused and the intensity of his energy was so strong when he was taking on a project that it was like he was in a tunnel of energy flow. And so much flowed through him. How else do you write 150 books and create 9 communities and 450 songs and all the other things that he did and still walk around with a bubble of joy and everything touching lives with divine friendship? It's all of this flow. But so once we have the flow going, then we also have to watch out, and I talk about this in the book, some of the things. One of the attitudes that will create energy flow is gratitude. Now we think of gratitude as being something more like a heart energy, but actually gratitude is that which removes the veil that would otherwise prevent a flow of energy from happening. See, everything that's coming to us, everything is really a ray of love from Divine Mother brought to you to help you in your life. And if you resent or push away that which is coming to you, it's like she comes with this precious, precious gift, this beautiful jewel, but she's encased it in ugly wrapping paper. And you look at that ugly wrapping paper and say, I don't like that wrapping paper. And you throw it away. Well, you throw the jewel of whatever's happening. Gratitude for everything that comes to you allows you to accept that energy and then be transformed by it. So gratitude in our service is extremely important, because if we can't work with gratitude in the service that we do, then we're going to end up blocking a lot of the flow of energy. The environment that we create, the company that we keep and work with, environment are things like, you have so many choices of vibrations here in a big city like this. You could You could skip right out of here and go to the closest bar if you wanted to. It's just vibrational. Obviously, you don't want to, but it's those little choices that we make that either keeps the energy rising or it depresses it. Service, almost more than anything, keeps that energy rising and expanding, because we keep the flow going that way, the flow of Divine Mother through us. Master said, I can't remember the exact quote, but the end of it is, lest in sloth I lose thee or forget thee. I've forgotten the whole line.
It's just lest in sloth I lose thee, I will find thee in activity.
Lest in sloth I lose thee, I will find thee in activity. And so he said about himself, I'm not sure I believe this, but he said about himself that he stayed active the way that he did because if he weren't active, he would misuse his energy wouldn't be used correctly. I'm not sure I believe that about him, but I know it's true about me. So unless we stay busy and positive and focused and helping, what else are we doing with this flow of divine energy that's there? And so gratitude, the environment around us, the company that we keep, all of that will help us with that flow. Finally, let me just talk, because this is fairly much the subject, is serving with joy. And that brings us to the chapter on serving with the aspects of God. So if you're trying, probably most of us would like to have peace in the world. I assume that that's true. If we want peace in the world, then our activities and our consciousness and our attitudes have to be peaceful. Otherwise, we become a source of non-peace or of violence or of whatever the opposite, and there can be many of them. So we have to serve with those qualities that we want to see. And most important of all is serving with joy. Joy, Swami went around the country giving a long series of lectures. This was a few years after the big fire that burned down the housing at Ananda. Swami went on the road on what we called the joy tours. And the joy tours, the subject was the practice of joy, or joy is the solution, not the reward, was one of the primary taglines. So we think that if we do something, if we serve and we suffer and our hands are all gnarly and we feel like we have really been, used up, then our reward is going to be joy. Who actually thinks that attitude works? If you serve with joy, then you're going to be joyful, and your service is going to be effective. Because that vibration, see, joy is a vibration. That vibration in you is infective, and it will infect the people that you serve. So if you serve with joy, the people that you serve will begin to feel joyful. If you serve with peace, the people that you serve will begin to feel peaceful. Swami learned Italian because he was giving a lecture and there was a translator, and he said, now, he was talking about meditation, now sit quietly, feel the peace. And the translator, senti la pace. Swami figured, well, this is not going to work. I better learn Italian. So you can't send a message with words that you don't have that message also in vibration. And so all of our service, the qualities of God are light, sound, power, wisdom, joy, peace, calmness, and love. And all of those qualities, each one of them is a powerful, powerful vibration that can help change people and help change you. And so if you can serve, if you can bring your light into the world and use the qualities of God that reside within you as the carrier wave, then that carrier wave changes you and changes the world around you.
Many of you have said to us today, thank you so much for coming. And I just want to say thank you so much for inviting us at such a beautiful time, because we get to come in here when the energy has been building for months, and then we just get to feel what you all have done. And it's extraordinary. And I'm so glad the way the timing worked out. I know many of you have been working tirelessly and selflessly and joyfully, and now to have this little bubble of joy before the big onslaught tomorrow, where we can come together, meditate, share inspiration, have satsang, share a meal together, break bread. So it's just wonderful. We're so happy that we can be a part of all this and to be with all of you. There's a quote that Jyotish uses in his book, which is I found very inspiring, by Albert Schweitzer. And Schweitzer was addressing a group of graduating college students, and he said, "Those among you will find happiness who find a way to serve." Who find a way to serve. And so he's linking a happy life with a serviceful life. And so I want to do what I would like to share with you this morning is a little more informal. I'd like to tell you some stories, and each one from my own life, and each one is a lesson I learned about how to find joy through service, different things. The first topic, and Jyotish touched on some of these, but the first topic is concentration and focus. How to find, so you think, okay, concentration, I work at my desk and I'm concentrated, or whatever it is I do, but how does that translate to finding joy in your service? Well, some years ago, Swami Kriyananda, he had a dome up at the meditation retreat, and he was moving down to the dome at Crystal Hermitage. And he was very, Swami always wanted things to be done weeks ahead of, or months or years ahead of when they actually happen. Just as master would he would ask someone to paint a room, and then he would walk into the room an hour later, show someone, and he did it all himself. And he was seeing past the limitations of time. But Swami was similar too. So he was anxious to move into this new dome, and it wasn't done yet. And so when I was living up at the meditation retreat at the time, and he came into the common dome where we were having breakfast, and he said, "We need to paint the inside of my dome. Who wants to come and help? Is anybody free?" And of course, we all forgot any of the responsibilities we had that day. We said, "Yes, we're free, we're free." And so we went up and we started painting, and we got there about 10, and we painted till about 1. And he said, "Okay, let's take a break for lunch now." And we all took a break. He said, "Let's come back in an hour." We came back, and I was assigned the task. There's for those of you who have been at the Crystal Hermitage Dome, there's that huge hexagonal window overlooking the Yuba River Valley. And it has big beams, like these beams in the sanctuary here. And so I was assigned, and they were rough wood, and I was assigned the job of painting those beams. And because it was rough wood and it was high, it absorbed the paint, and you had to put many, many coats on it. So I was painting, and Swami was painting along with us. It wasn't like he just went off and did something else. And in those days, he was quite snappy on his feet, let's say. And so we were all painting, and the time went by, and the time went by, and I was just painting. And the more I painted, the more all I was aware of was every little hole in that beam. And the paint was going in, and okay, I finished that little inch, and I'll move on to the next little inch. And the more time went by, the more concentrated I became, and the more absolutely I forgot everything else. And that was the gift Swami was giving us that day, the gift of absolute self-forgetfulness. And I just began, he was sharing with us his bubble of joy by concentration and self-forgetfulness. And then at a certain point, Swami said, okay, we've been working long enough today, let's call it a day. And we looked at the clock. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. And we had painted from, probably we started about 2. We had painted all afternoon, all evening. And I have never had an experience before or since like that. But it was a little gift that he gave us of concentration. And we felt utterly refreshed. We weren't tired. We went and had a couple hours of sleep, and the next day began. And joy, energy, but that came from the concentration. So there's and in and of itself, concentration won't bring you a whole lot, but if through that concentration you move to self-forgetfulness, and then there's joy at the end of that. So that's how to find joy in service through self-forgetfulness. Then the next story is how to find joy in service through enthusiasm. And this story, I wrote about it in a blog. I called it the 2 bowls of lemons. And this was up at the meditation retreat again. And we were having a big Indian banquet. And I think probably Asha was in charge because she did a lot. She was in charge of the kitchen at that time. And so I came in and I said, is there anything I can do to help? We didn't have electricity in those days. And so there was a big box of lemons, I don't know, 50 pounds or something. She said, these all need to be juiced. And I said, okay. And so she said, here's a little hand juicer, and here's a bowl. So you could take the box out, and so I put it in a bowl, and then here's a jar, a gallon jar, and you put the lemon juice. So she said, go outside, it's nice out. So I went out, there was a nice picnic table under a tree. It was summer and the birds were around. It was happy, and I was happy to do it because I could feel all the energy. So I had a lot of enthusiasm to do this, and I was juicing my lemons. And then one of the guests came by. And for those of you who know the principle of Tom Sawyer whitewashing the fence, if you have enthusiasm, other people think that must be fun. And so this fellow walked by and he said, oh, can I help you? And I said, sure, go get a juicer and a bowl. And so he did. He came back out, and I was just having a good time. And he did it for a little while, and then he said, I think your juicer's better than mine. So I said, fine, let's trade juicer. So he had my juicer, I had his juicer. And we're working away, and I'm just filled with enthusiasm. And then he looked at me and he said, I think your lemons are better than mine. And I said, fine, let's trade bowls of lemons. But he was not bringing enthusiasm to it, so it was no fun for him. And then he went on for a few minutes, and he said, I just remembered something I have to do. I said, fine. And I just finished juicing the lemons. But remember, Master says, everything in the world conditions are all neutral. It's only how we think about them. And so whatever you're assigned to do, if you bring enthusiasm to it, then it can be joyful. But if you just say, okay, one more day of doing the same old thing, you just cut off the flow of energy. And then another story I want to share is to find joy in service, you have to be unattached to praise or blame if people like it, if they don't like it. You're doing it for God. And if you do it for God, whatever happens, if tomorrow at the Yogananda Fest, if we're the only people that come, it really doesn't matter. And I think more will come, but if they don't, We know what we put in, and we know why we did it. We did it for God. And that's the joy in and of itself. And so this is a story about doing something pretty menial, but doing it with the thought, I'm not going to get any recognition for this, and the joy that came. And this happened again years ago at Ananda. And at that time, Swami, usually one day a week, I think just to take a break, he would go into town, take a break from his writing, and just do errands and so forth. And so he asked, it was actually Asha and me, and I think it was another girl, but I couldn't remember. It might have just, I think there were 3 of us. We would go over to his house, he would leave, go to town, and we'd clean his house all day long. He'd come back at the end of the day and we'd leave. And so one day we went in there, and we kind of would decide who would do what. So I kind of looked around, went in the bathroom, and I thought, oh boy, that shower stall, fiberglass shower stall, has really been neglected. It is just covered with mildew. And I said, okay, I'm going to work in the bathroom, clean it up. So started in the morning, and it was a hard job. That mildew was really ingrained in the fiberglass, and I was just working and working and working. And I can't say I forgot time, because I kept looking, how much longer am I going to be doing this? And then I started having this little sinking feeling that we all do when or I do, maybe you never do, when we're working really hard on something. And I thought, I bet Swami's not even going to notice that I did this, because I was so happy to do it for him, And I said, he's probably going to come home and he'll never notice that I spent all day scrubbing the mildew off the shower stall. And then I was sort of, my energy dropped, And then I thought, no, that's really a crummy attitude. You're doing this for God, and God sees. And if Swami never notices, it doesn't matter at all. And I felt so joyful. And the day we knew Swami was coming back, and so we gathered all the cleaning supplies and put them away. And I just was feeling so joyful in my heart. And then Swami walked in. And he looked around, he said, thank you all so much. He didn't really talk to us that much. He just, we were happy to be serving him. He walked in and we were just leaving, and he said, I was just about out the door, and he said, wait a minute. He said, by the way, I hope someone really cleaned that shower stall. It really needed to be cleaned. And it was like Divine Mother was saying, I think if I had the bad attitude, he would not have said that. If I was thinking, well, I wonder if he's going to even notice, But I just thought, I'm so happy that I did it, and I did it for God. So to find joy in service, you can't look for the rewards or the results. You just do it. You just do it, and whatever comes, comes, and God sees it all. Swami tells the story of one of his brother monks, Norman, who they were doing some construction work. I believe it was at Hollywood Church, and they were putting in the wooden studs in the wall that were going to be covered up by sheetrock and so forth, insulation and sheetrock. And Norman was taking such care as he nailed the nails into the wood. And somebody came up and said, what are you taking so much time with that? No one's going to see it. It's going to be covered up. And Norman just said, no, Christ will see it. God will see it. And that's such a beautiful attitude. And it's so joyful and freeing when you think every little flower that you plant, every tree that you prune, every book that you put on the shelf, every spreadsheet that you make, God sees your service. He sees the spirit behind it. And the more I'm on the path, the more I become aware, and I hope you all as well, how to speak a language that God will hear. And when you pray, if it's just, oh Lord, you've got to do this, listen to me, and I've prayed that way, but with emotion, with outward intensity, and those prayers are really never answered. But when you pray with that's why Master said, oh, it's so maddening. I can't pray with words anymore, but with only the whispers of my thoughts. When you pray with just a subtle thought held in peace, in devotion, in love, you know that's what God hears. And that's what, when Swami came and said, I hope someone cleaned the shower stall, I just held that thought very gently. God knows what I did. And then Swami responded to that thought. And he did that a number of times in my life, where there would just be this little thought that I thought was so hidden, because I didn't want it to be blatant. And that little hidden thought, he would, amongst a whole conversation, he would respond to that little hidden thought. And so, if in our service there's always that inward thought going on subtly, not a big show, not so that everybody knows about it. You don't wear your devotion on your shirt sleeve. You keep it very private and subtle and offered upward. If we can have in our service to make it joyful, to always have that thought, that, Lord, I'm doing this for you only, and through you in others, but not for recognition, not for approval, not for anything else, but just for pure love. And that's when service really transcends the action. And it says in the Gita, and it's something to give a good deal of thought to, the wise is he who sees inaction in action, and action in inaction. So it's not what you're doing, but it's the consciousness. The wise man realizes that the core of action is the consciousness, and that the core of consciousness can be expressed in what we do. And that makes a beautiful loop. And then another story that I will share, and this is about, and I think probably many of you in this room can relate to it, building up to the Yogananda Fest, how to push beyond self-determined limits. I can work this hard, but I can't work that hard. I can go for 8 hours, but I can't go for 10 hours. Well, this was actually, and then how to find joy in that, breaking down the sense of limitation in your service and limitation of energy. This particular day had been a very, very busy day in my life. This wasn't too long ago. And I had been going from early morning till, by the time I got home, it was about 7. And just pretty nonstop and intensely so. And by the time I got home, I was tired. And I thought, oh, I'm done. The day is done. And I made some dinner for us, some soup for us to have for dinner. And I was just sitting down to have the soup, and then I was going to watch a movie or something. I needed to just not be doing anymore for a while. And then the phone rang. And I picked it up, and it was a friend of mine, but her voice sounded terrible. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, oh my God, I just got so sick today, and I don't have any food in the house, and do you have any soup you could bring over? And I just said, yeah, I'll be right over. And I hung up, and I was not happy about it, but I thought, I don't have a choice here. So I got some soup in a jar, and I was driving over to her house, and then I brought it to her, and she was so grateful. And, then I was driving home, and tears of joy were just flowing down my cheeks, because I just was thinking, Divine Mother, thank you for showing me that there's always more to be given. And when you think you've given it all, there's always more. And that's where the joy is. When you cross that threshold and you say, I'm not going to say I can't do anymore, because it's only when I find out, when I have no more to give, then that's when God comes and you feel his energy flowing through you. So it's like, for those of you who have done extreme sports, believe it or not, Jyotish and I have run marathons, but it's when you get to that very end, when you feel like, I don't have anything more here, then you feel that certain kind of energy come in that can only come when you have emptied yourself out. And that's the whole process of service. To find joy in service, concentrate, enthusiasm, give it all to God, and then push beyond your limits. And it's in all those things that you find the joy. And then finally, remember, as we started out saying, that Master said our path is one of service and joy and meditation. Remember, and sometimes as devotees we make this mistake. We think, well, I'm serving, so I don't have time to meditate. That's a big mistake. Your service should never take precedence over the time you spend in meditation. Sometimes you have to adjust, but if it's on an ongoing basis, there was a story that Swami tells when they were building Encinitas, and there was these towers with the lotuses on the top, and they were pushing up against a deadline. And one of the men was in charge, and the opening was scheduled for that day, and one of the men was in charge of painting those lotuses, and they were all up against the time crunch, and he didn't show up to work in the morning. And then finally Master was there, and finally he showed up a few hours later, and Master said, "Where were you? We were waiting for you to do this." And he said, "I was meditating, Master." He said, "Oh, that's fine then." So we need, if someone's telling you, no, you have to forget your service, your meditation, you have to go serve, by and large, that's not a good trade-off. I mean, sometimes we don't have a choice, but it should be the rare occasion. Because why? You will not be able to understand the depth of service without meditation. It'll just be outward activity. It's the experience of joy in the peace and stillness of meditation that enables you to cross that bridge between outward activity and divine service. So they both have to be brought together. And I would like to close now with an experiential activity that we'll all do together. So, yeah, you can put down your notebooks, put down everything, and we're going to, Swamiji, in his affirmations for self-healing, there's one on service. And I thought we would read it and do the affirmation. But first of all, before we do, I want you all, let's pranayama be your religion. Let's do a couple of deep breaths. Tense, throw the breath out. Once more, inhale. Throw the breath out. Now concentrate at the spiritual eye. And I want each one of us to begin by thinking of one area of activity in your life that you do not feel is service, but you feel is just something you have to do, some drudge work. Think about it. Now, I want you to see that, visualize yourself doing that activity. See yourself doing it. But see yourself doing it in a spirit of divine service. Concentrate on that, the joy and the freedom of doing that mundane activity in a spirit of divine service. Bring all the attitudes we've been talking about: gratitude, joy, willingness, giving it to God, not looking for recognition, energy. See yourself doing that activity in a higher state of consciousness and focus deeply. Hold it so that from this day on, that activity will be different for you. Now listen to what Swamiji has written about service. Service is ennobling. It is a way of offering our human littleness into the great reality that is God. Service should not be given with the thought that one is serving people merely. It should be given with an inward consciousness to the Lord who resides in all creatures. When we serve others in this spirit, we find our own spirits become freed from egotism. Peace then fills us in the realization that there isn't anyone with whom we need compete. What joy to think that we belong to God. Now let's do the affirmation together. I will serve God through others.
I will serve God through others.
And by my service, to God, release the hold the ego has on me. I am free in God. In God I am free. I will serve God through others. And by my service to God, release the hold the ego has on me. I am free in God. In God I am free. I will serve God through others. And by my service to God, release the hold the ego has on me. I am free in God. In God I am free. I will serve God through others. And by my service to God, release the hold the ego has on me. I am free in God. In God I am free. Now repeat after me mentally only, but with concentration, enthusiasm, joy, and energy. I will serve God through others. And by my service to God, release the hold the ego has on me. I am free in God. In God I am free. Let's pray. Usually we pray silently, but let's do this prayer aloud together. All that I do, Lord, I do for love of Thee. Accept the flowers of my service to Thee as I place them on the altar of omnipresence. Om. Peace. Amen. Thank you all very much.